Okay, guys, we are on Chapter 10, Lesson 3, Composition and Inverses of Functions. Now, composition means putting together, and inverse means undoing. So what we're going to do is we're going to be working with functions and putting them together, working with functions and figuring out how to undo them, or the inverse of them. Okay, so here's what I mean by putting functions together. Suppose you have one function, f of x equals x squared. And then you have another function, g of x, and it's 2x. Now, if I say I want you to do f of g of x, then what could something like that mean? It means I want you to figure out what a number would be in g, and then plug that into f, and then tell me what the whole thing would end up being. Let's do a couple of examples. So let's pick x equals 3. Now I need to do f of g of, not x anymore, but 3, and figure out what that would be. So we're going to take 3, plug it into 2x, and get 6. So g of 3 is 6. Now I'm going to take 6 and plug it into f of x. So f of 6 is 36. So f of g of 3 is 36. Are you understanding how this works? You start on the inside, get the answer, and then plug it into the next one, and then f of g of 3 is 36. Okay, now let's you can do it either direction. You can do f of g of x, or you can do g of f of x. And in that case, what would you start with? Well, let me make sure you can see everything. You would start with f of x on the inside. So if I said find g of f of 3, then you're going to make sure that you plug in 3 to f. So like this. F of 3 is 3 squared. And then you're going to put, which is 9. Then you're going to do g of 9, which is 18. So g of f of 3 is 18. You plug in the number to the inside function, then you get the answer and plug that into the outside function. Okay, now, something that's really interesting. Do you remember how like anything times 1 is itself? This is called identity, multiplicative identity. Well, what if you had two functions that undid each other? Those functions are inverses of each other. So you can have one function that starts with an x, gets an answer, then you plug that answer into another function and it puts it right back to what you started with. So it's like if you have f of 3 and then you get an answer and then you plug it into g, so g of f of 3, and then it undoes it, and so it puts it right back at 3. Let's do a couple examples so you see what I mean in here. So look at this. These are inverse functions. These are going to be inverse functions. So f of x equals x plus 4 over 2, and then g of x is equal to 2x minus 4. Okay, now watch this. If I start with x equals 1, okay, I'm going to plug in 1, so f of 1 equals 1 plus 4. Let's make it easier. Let's do 2. So 2 plus 4 divided by 2. So f of 2 equals 6 over 2. Gosh, sorry. Okay, now I'm going to take f of 2, which is 3, and plug it into my g of x. So what we're looking for is g of f of 2. I'm plugged in 2, and then I'm going to plug in my f of 2 answer into g. So here we go. So g of 3 equals 2 times 3 minus 4. 6 minus 4, is 2. Now what did we start with? We started with 2. So f of x and g of x are inverse because g undid the f. Now what if we did f of g of 2? Let's see, it's got to work both ways for them to be inverse. Okay, so let's figure out g of 2. Now if it is an inverse, we should end up with that being 2. If this is an inverse, it's 2. This was 2. So let's see if we plug in a 2 and end up with a 2. So g of 2 is 2 times 2 minus 4, which is 0. Now we're going to take that and plug it in to our f. And guess what? We ended up with 2. F of g of 2 is equal to 2. And g of f of 2 was equal to 2. So no matter which direction we went, when we started with 2, we ended up with 2. We started with 2 and ended up with 2. These are inverse functions. Okay? So how do you know if two functions are inverses of each other? If you start with an x, and then you do f of g of x, and it equals x, it's an inverse, as long as it works either direction. So if you have two functions, f and g, and then you put in x of the other function, plug it in, and it should all be, so f of g of x equals x, and g of f of x equals x. Then these are inverses. And what's really cool is when you graph it, when you graph these things, it'll always mirror on this, it'll always mirror across the y equals x line. So any function, because if you think about this, they just flip. Okay, sorry. Let me try that one more time. So if f of g of x equals x, and if g of f of x equals x, these functions are inverse. Now you can write this. So if you have f of x, the inverse of f of x is written like this. F inverse of x. This is not an exponent, so don't get tricked. You'll see this. F inverse is how you read it. You read f inverse of x. It does not mean 1 over f of x. It's not an exponent. It just means the f inverse. Okay. Now, not every function has an inverse. If you graph a function, you can tell if it has an inverse by a horizontal line test. So, for example, will this one have an inverse? No, because it hit 2 points. Does this one have an inverse? Yes, because no horizontal line will touch it in more than one place. Will a line have an inverse? Yes, because it passes the horizontal line test. Okay, the only other thing we have left in this lesson is figuring out how to find the inverse of a function. So suppose I say f of x is equal to x cubed minus 1, and then I say find inverse, f inverse. Well, the first thing is ask the question. You can go ahead and graph it. Graph it using your computer or your phone, and then look at it. Does it pass the horizontal line test? Does it have an inverse? Remember, if when you graph it, you see a parabola like this, it's not going to be inverse. There's not going to be an inverse for it. So step 1 is, does it even have an inverse? Okay, step 2 is change it to the y notation. So y equals x cubed minus 1. Then we're going to straight up swap the x and the y, because when we do an inverse, it always flips the x's and the y's. Okay, so switch the x and the y, then solve for y. So So I'm going to add 1, x plus 1 equals y cubed, cube root both sides. And that is our answer with one more step involved. We need to change it to the function notation. So f inverse of x equals the cube root of x plus 1. Okay, let me know if you have any questions, and you should be able to get started. Thanks.